Dr. Temple Grandin, PhD.
Well, it's great to be here tonight. We can get my first slide up there, maybe get it in presentation format. Okay, that's good. And I think I'll just talk a little bit about my early intervention. I didn't speak until I was age 4, and I got into very good early intervention when I was 2.5 years old. I cannot emphasize how important that is. And I had speech therapy. My speech teacher would, she'd hold up a cup and she'd say cup, and then she'd say cup-pa, where she'd say it very, very slowly. And the goal was to teach me speech, also turn taking. Learn how to wait and take turns at games. Really important thing to teach these kids. And then skills, things like getting dressed, putting my coat on, washing hands, eating with a knife and fork, just, basic skills. And if you're doing really good therapy, the kids should like going to therapy. If the kid hates therapy, something is wrong. But those are the basic 4 things that would be progress. And that's my new book right up there, Visual Thinking. I'm going to be talking about that a little bit later, because I want to really talk about career. Where we're having problems is making the transition to adult life. That's where there's big problems. We're actually doing a really good job on a lot of the early intervention. And I had a lot of people that helped me to learn how to work. A lot of really good mentors. I can go to the next slide, please. Now, I think differently. When I was in my 20s, I thought everybody thought in pictures the way I thought. I didn't know that other people thought differently. I've been getting very interested in how people think. I've done a lot of thinking about that. And I think completely in pictures. If you watch the HBO movie, that showed exactly how I think. And it was a shock when I finally figured out that a lot of people didn't think in pictures. They thought in words. We'll be talking a little bit more about that. The next slide just shows how being a visual thinker helped me in my work with animals. We can go to the next slide. And that's a shadow of me scaring the cattle in a cattle chute because I was trying to take a picture with my iPhone. In fact, I did a lot of work on the Brawley plant, what's now One Beef. That's got my facilities. Curved handling facility I designed. Unfortunately, it's covered up with shade cloth now, so you can't Google Earth it because the cattle are getting too hot. And my center track restrainer system. And that's a piece of equipment I developed. And the person who built that piece of equipment for me originally had autism, undiagnosed. This is one of the things that gets me really kind of upset to go back and forth between the autism world and the industrial world. I know all kinds of people in skilled trades, computer science, probably were autistic. I have granddads coming up to me all the time, and they tell me they're autistic when kids get diagnosed. Yeah, don't get trapped by the label. I'm really glad today when I visited 2 schools that I went to the special ed department, but I also went over to the FFA department. Okay, it's really important that I visited both. Really, really important. Don't get too stuck in the autism box. One of the problems is autism goes from Einstein to somebody who can't dress themselves, and it has the same name. Let's go to the next slide. Now, let's look at engineering stuff. I've done a lot of engineering, but I can't do higher math. But there's a whole part of engineering I call the clever engineering department. We'll be discussing that more later. Now, engineers calculate risk. People like me see risk. That's the launch pad that the Artemis just successfully got launched from. I visited that 5 years ago, and I found something in it that shouldn't have been in there, along with the rocket fueling equipment. And he is on the next slide. He was living in the base of the launch pad where they were building fueling equipment. Nobody else knew he was in there. But I saw a little motion on the stairway, and I watched him run off into the bushes. No, he was overnighting with the fueling equipment. And I get to thinking, what have you been chewing? Yeah, I'm very glad I found him, so he could have really messed up the mission. But the thing that shocked me is they didn't know he was in there. You see, that's seeing something. Let's go to the next slide. All right, let's look at why we need visual thinkers in science. Because I got a big concern right now in science. I can't do higher math. You know what? I wouldn't be able to graduate from high school in California. I'm serious. And there's two parts of engineering and science. You have the mathematical part, and we need that. But we then also have the visual part. See these two little mixing devices for, a magnetic stirrer, a rotary stirring device, little $300 devices for mixing up stuff in labs. Well, millions of dollars worth of cancer research was wrecked because they didn't write in the methods section of their experiment which one of these little contraptions they used. It matters. You see, this is the kind of stuff. I review a lot of journal articles. Man, do I go into the methods section. You tell me how you housed your animals. You tell me what breed of pig you used. What did you feed it? Because it makes a difference. You see, and as I read those things, I see it. I'm getting very concerned that my kind of thinker's getting screened out. And I'm going to be showing you later on where we've got skill loss issue. And there's a big connection here between what goes on in the autism world and what's going on out in the industry. People like One Beef now have trouble finding people to fix things. I was really glad to see over at the school, and the one school I went to, a really great shop. Yeah, don't say the stupid kids go to shop. They're not the stupid kids. It's a different kind of thinking. And that's what my visual thinking book is all about. And if we run out of them, Amazon's got plenty more of them. And I'll sign some little papers you can stick in the copy that will come in the Amazon box. Visual thinking. Yeah, I want you to order it. Let's go to the next slide. Now, there's 3 different types of thinking. There's some research that shows that this exists. Let's go to the next slide. I'm what's called an object visualizer. Can't do algebra, but I'm really good at it in mechanical equipment and art. Mechanics and art go together. You got these kids that are addicted to video games? Why don't you get them in the lowrider club? They're going to find that's a lot more interesting, and the mechanical things are a lot more interesting than video games. I've talked to many photographers, professional photographers, TV photographers. They're all dyslexic, but boy, they can use that camera. And working with animals. And I'm talking high-end skilled trades. I'm not talking about asphalting or roofing. I'm talking about the real high-end stuff where you actually invent a mechanical equipment. That's the object visualizer. Okay, let's go to the next slide. That's going to be a degreed engineer. You're a mathematician. It's pattern thinking, visual spatial pattern thinker, computer programming, mathematical engineering, chemistry, physics, and music and math. Those tend to go together. Well, I had a chance to try the exact same computer that Bill Gates tried. I had to drop the class. He was still climbing out the window and sneaking into the university computing lab and doing it on the exact same machine. Yeah, he could do it, I couldn't. But the important thing is we both got exposed to that computer. That's really important. So much in careers is you got to get exposed to stuff. Let's go to the next slide. And then, of course, we got our verbal thinkers, writers, teachers, psychologists. They think in words. And I think sometimes that some of the people that think in words have a hard time imagining that non-word thinking exists. And many, many people are mixtures. And I've got research references in my book to show that what I'm telling you is not a bunch of BS. And there's some people that one person called my book conjecture, and I'm going, you don't have any support for your calling it conjecture. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Now, this is some of the studies that are done, that are shown in the book. Got a whole bunch of references. But the thing that's interesting is when I went back and I looked up all the jobs that I did, there was a very interesting kind of dividing up of the labor in engineering. The shop people that couldn't do the algebra invented all the mechanical equipment in the factory, and the mathematicians do the boilers and refrigeration, power and water, and make sure the roof doesn't collapse. See, this is where you need to have both. Let's go to the next slide. Many people are mixtures, but you get a kid with a label, you tend to be extreme. We need to be working on building up the area of strength. I was good at drawing when I was 7 years old, so my mother always encouraged my drawing. But I would just draw the same horse head over and over and over again, So she said, well, let's draw the entire horse. Let's draw the stable. Take that fixation and broaden it. Take the thing the kid's fixated on and broaden it. Let's do, let's say they like cars. Let's do math with cars, do reading with cars. Broaden that fixation. Let's go to the next slide. Turns out I've got a big visual thinking circuit in my head. I've got a giant graphics card, big, huge internet trunk line, all the way back to the primary visual cortex. Let's go to the next slide. This is another picture of my big visual thinking circuit. Yeah, we'll go to the next slide. Okay, now let's look at some other research to show that different kinds of thinking actually exist. Okay, let's say we want to teach different people, like maybe how a water pump works, for example. I want to look at the diagrams and the pictures. Like when I'm reading a lot of articles, I'll look at the charts and the tables first. The verbal thinker will read the text, and the mathematician tends to look at both. Let's go to the next slide. Now this is an interesting study. These are specialized art students. They took teams of students from specialized high schools. And so the art students made a team, then you had the science students, the more mathematical students, and then the humanities students, the more literary students. And their job was to invent a planet and draw it. So the art students made fantastic planets: Crystal Planet, Skyscraper Planet, Polar Bear and Palm Tree Planet. And the science students just made it round, kind of boring, tell what the the atmosphere was like, what the gravity's like. And the humanities students started writing it down, and then they go, well, that's against the rules, so they just painted splotches. But what worried me about the humanities students, the verbal thinkers, they didn't do any planning of their projects. See, this is one of the big problems, big, broad concepts. But how do you actually implement those concepts? Let's go to the next slide. Verbal thinkers overgeneralize and leave out details, and the mathematicians and the object visualizers, maybe they got too many details. But you see, I am a bottom-up thinker, and I discovered that that's exactly the same way a computer thinks, putting specific examples into categories. All right, let's talk about jobs for people on the spectrum. All right, here's the horrible ones. Chaotic Christmas wrapping station, crazy McDonald's takeout window, having to make change the old-fashioned way and talk to a customer. Yak, 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 lots of strings of verbal instructions and not able to write it down. Those are the failure jobs. Good jobs: ice cream shop, office supply store, auto store, farm store, much more quieter kind of retail positions. You see, and I can group them into two categories. It's bottom-up thinking. Let's go to the next slide. Now let's look back at the early inventors. They were all mechanical. In fact, the patent office, when it first started, you had to make a model and give it to the patent office. And they were all mechanical devices, like grain harvesting equipment. And when I was in 4th grade, my favorite book, one of them, was about famous inventors. And then another favorite book was about Black Beauty. Go to the next slide. And this is the guy who invented the 3D printer. And you got to remember, a 3D printer is a mechanical device controlled by a computer. I get mad when someone says, well, the tractor's just a rolling computer. Well, it's also a mechanical device controlled by a computer. We need both kinds of minds working on it. Let's go to the next slide. Now, we've got a problem. We've got some things we're not making anymore because the shop people that I worked with are retiring and they're not getting replaced. We've got a real issue right now with skill loss. Very concerned about it. Let's go to the next slide. Over half of all large industrial 3D printers are made in Europe. We'll give you some more examples, and then I'm going to explain to you why that's happened. Let's go to the next slide. The state-of-the-art electronic chip-making machine comes from Holland. Okay, that's the inside. The mathematicians did that, and I'll show you the outside. It's where you need people like me. On the next slide, there's lots of skilled trade stuff there. We don't make this. It comes from Holland, even though we invented the technology. Let's go to the next slide. State-of-the-art electron microscope from Germany. Let's go to the next slide. All right, here's something we're not making. You see all that complicated equipment in that meat processing plant? It's a new pork processing plant. It is from Holland and Quebec. State-of-the-art chicken processing plants now are coming from Holland. We used to make this stuff. Now, I worked 25 years out in heavy construction. I was over on the Brawley plant when that was being built. That was one of the jobs that I worked on. And back when that was being built, we built more of this stuff. There's all kinds of stuff coming from Italy. You can look up the Apollo chicken harvesting machine. Total clever engineering. But what I've noticed is the shop people, the ones that can't do algebra, they build this stuff. And the mathematical engineer does the boilers and refrigeration. We don't understand that stuff. We don't understand it. We're afraid of it. It's dangerous. Let the mathematicians do that. But you see, you have these two parts, and we have a very serious skill loss. I just got back from Tennessee, and they just bought some contraption so that they can feed either coal or wood chips to their power plant. It's from Italy. Let's go to the next slide. And the fabric for the Mars lander is from the UK, woven on high-tech European looms. Let's go to the next slide. And that's the Steve Jobs Theater. Structural glass walls from Italy and Germany, and the roofs from Dubai, and I'm standing in the middle of it screaming, we don't make it anymore. And there's a connection here. Let's go to the next slide. One of the worst things we did in the schools is taking out all the hands-on classes. Well, I'm very glad that I went to school today that had a really, really great wood shop and a really great metalworking shop. When I was in elementary school, I had art, sewing, and woodworking. I loved those classes. Musical instruments, how can a kid find out they like music if they never exposed to an instrument? The school play. I could care less about acting in the play, but boy, I loved to make scenery and costumes. That was my big thing. Auto shop. Yeah. And the thing is, it's a different kind of thinking that goes with these things, and we need all the kinds of thinking. A huge, huge skill loss issue. Let's go to the next slide. Now, algebra, the big gatekeeper. Now, why don't you let them take business math, accounting, taxes, how to do invoices and bills, how to bill clients, how to write a business letter, some stuff like that. You know, there's a place for algebra. If you want to do artificial intelligence, you need linear algebra. I can find the papers for you online. I don't understand them, but I can find them online to give to the right kid. I see parents get so locked into the autism trap that I saw two parents that were both computer programmers. Their kid was a brain in math, and they didn't think to teach him programming. Come on, parents, teach your kid programming. There's no way he's going to learn it if they're not exposed to it. You know, we really need to have algebra for veterinary tech. The veterinarians actually need to use calculus. I train veterinarians. There's no way I could get into vet school. I can't do the prerequisites. And so what would I do? If somebody waved a magic wand and they made me 18, low income, but they'll let me have my knowledge. I know where I'm going. Oh, the big new robotic Amazon warehouse, that's where I'm going. Because I'm going to design the next one. And I have seen people in my industry do that path. Start out working in the plant, and the next thing you know, 15 years later, they're in charge of the new plant addition. I've seen people do that. But what's happened is the people I've worked with are retired out, and they're not getting replaced enough. You go in Colorado, we've taken all of the hands-on classes out. And you can't find an electrician in Colorado right now. Let's go to the next slide. All right, let's go back and let's look at some, my grandfather. He was an MIT-trained mathematical engineer. He worked with an autistic guy to invent the autopilot for airplanes. So this guy comes up with this crazy idea for these little coils. Everyone thought this was nuts. All the aviation people were mocking it and saying it was stupid. And they tinkered and they tinkered and then tinkered in a loft. And they got it to work. The only problem is the stolen copy was in every plane in World War II. They needed a lawyer. That's where they needed a verbal thinker. See, this is what I want to talk about, complementary skills. Like to build the entire food processing plant, you got to have the mathematicians to do all the boilers and refrigeration systems. But they're not the ones that do what I call the clever engineering department. In my book, In Visual Thinking, I write about Marine Innovation Boot Camp. So if you give a guys a pull piles of junk and say make a vehicle out of it, truck drivers are better at this than degreed engineers. It's just sort of MacGyvering something together. Go on to the next slide. Okay, the object visualizers, the guys in the shop, can't do algebra. They make all the mechanical equipment. Think farm equipment, all the farm implements. They're very clever. We have a huge shortage. And then, all right, now let's go back to Europe. Why is Holland making all this stuff? So I go online and I type in Netherlands, educational system. I go Italy, educational system. Denmark, educational system. In 9th grade, the kid can decide, do I go the university route or the tech route? And they don't stick their nose up at the tech route. And that's why they're making all this stuff that we're not making. Yeah, okay, we try to get the power plant more inefficient, and we got to buy something from Italy. I just learned that last week, my trip to Tennessee. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, how did I collaborate on my visual thinking book? Well, as a visual thinker, my writing, I'm a little bit disorganized. I can write a really nice business letter. I can write a short article that's organized. But for a book, I would do the rough drafts, and Betsy, my verbal co-writer, organized it. You see, that's the different kinds of minds working together, collaborating together, and using the complementary skills. I'd put too much detail in, and Betsy sometimes would take out too much detail, and together we had just the right amount of detail. Let's go to the next slide. Okay. If the engineers, the mathematicians, did all the design of a building, it might be just a concrete box and pretty boring, and really safe, and it would work. So you'd have the architects to make it look nice. That's different kinds of minds working together. Let's go to the next slide. 20% of the people that I worked with on equipment were either dyslexic, autistic, or ADHD, and some of them owned big shops. They started out as little tiny shops and they grew. And today, when I went and I visited the school, I talked to a boy who's building some grooming stands for steers, for the show steers. And he had a real nice one, it was green and yellow with a sign on it. I said, you need to put a steer on that, have a real nice background, and start making a brochure of your work. Okay, grooming stands, they're fairly simple things, but that is how small shops start. They start with something simple like that, and then you do something else. The next thing you know, you're designing entire factories. Because I've been in this industry for 50 years, and I've worked with some people for over 30 years, and I can remember when they were tiny shops. Now they grew up, and one of them has a corporate jet now. No, we say we need the different minds. I think we really have to think about some of our educational things. Yeah, it's good that for certain things you need all this algebra. And I think part of the problem is, and I had a professor say to me, you need algebra for logical thought. That's not how I think. I just see it. And then somebody challenged me and say, I don't understand how you can visualize risk. Like, for example, Fukushima. Yeah, it drowned. They didn't have watertight doors. I can just see the water going all over the site, flooding the basement and drowning the electrically operated emergency cooling pump. And I think some verbal thinkers have a hard time understanding that I could actually see that. No, I can play that like a movie in my head. Let's go to the next slide. Here I already discussed the grandparents. Let's go to the next slide. What would happen to some top innovators today? Some of the ancient innovators. What would happen to them? Let's go to the next slide. What would happen to Michelangelo? Grubby little 12-year-old, dropped out of school, thought it was really funny to borrow a drawing, copy it, and then give the owner back the copy, and the owner didn't know he got the copy, and he bragged about it and got in trouble for it. But he was running around in all the cathedrals looking at all the art that was being commissioned. That's exposure. And then he grew up with stone cutting tools. We've got kids today that never use a tool. We've got kids today totally removed from the world of the practical. I'm not saying everybody should go into skilled trades, but I'm just saying everyone should try enough different things so then they can kind of see what they gravitate towards. So it started out with Michelangelo, exposure to the career, then mentoring. Seen that pattern over and over again. Let's go to the next slide. Steve Jobs, bullied in school, tinkered around in the next door neighbor's garage. You know, he was an artist. He wasn't a programmer. He was an artist. And then the mathematicians had to make the inside of the phone work. You see, but Steve Jobs made a simple interface that everybody could use without having to learn how to use the phone. Einstein had no speech until age 3. Where would he be today? He'd be in an autism program today. Now you can argue about whether or not he's autistic, but a nonverbal 3-year-old's going to land in an autism program today. Well, what happened to Einstein? Let's go to the next slide. Thomas Edison, high school dropout. Now, one thing, he learned how to work at an early age, and this is where we're really falling down. Kids are not learning how to work. It's not the same skill as studying. Let's start with chores for little kids, then volunteer jobs where they're working for somebody outside the family on a schedule, like maybe a church volunteer job. Family is no longer the boss. And then he had a mentor that taught him how to use the telegraph. Let's go to the next slide. Elon Musk is on the spectrum. Wonderful engineer. Oh, I really admire his engineering. Twitter, we'll just have to wait and see. We'll just leave it at that. You see, that's something that's much more social. But in engineering, man, he's absolutely tops. Let's go to the next slide. A Nobel Prize winner was 50% more likely to have an arts and crafts hobby compared to other scientists. That's another reason for keeping all of these things in the schools. Let's go to the next slide. All right, let's look at some tips for working with people that are different. I do a lot of talks to business. And I show this first half of this slideshow to business. U.S. Steel, IBM Computers, pharmaceutical companies. There's lots of different kinds of things. And how can they help the individuals that are different to be successful at work? Let's avoid the multitasking jobs, like the crazy McDonald's takeout window. The other thing is, I cannot remember long strings of verbal instruction, like yakety yak, yak, yak. I can't remember that sequence. So give me a pilot's checklist. Step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. The other thing you got to do with these kids is a lot of parents tend to overprotect their kids. You have to stretch them. You don't throw them into the Christmas wrapping station chaos. You don't do that. And I can see a particular Christmas wrapping station back at home to be really bad. And I looked at this and I thought I would not put them in this. It was at a Barnes & Noble bookstore. Chaos at Christmas time. But other times of the year, a Barnes & Noble bookstore would be a wonderful place to put a person on the spectrum. But that wrapping station, oh, no. And give them choices, but you got to stretch them. I'm seeing too many kids today that aren't learning things like shopping. They aren't learning things like understanding money. I was shopping when I was 7, going in stores by myself and buying things. Give them some choices. Vagueness doesn't work. But I'm seeing too many kids going nowhere a day. And when I say to the mom, your kid maybe ought to buy some printer paper, she'll tell me that she couldn't let go. I had another mom said she didn't know when she could get up the guts. The next time she went to a gas station, let me tell you, with your prices here, it takes guts to buy diesel. It's almost $6. I couldn't believe it. Now that's like horrible. But okay, the next time you take your diesel truck in to buy some real rip-off expensive fuel, tell your kid to go in the store and buy a jug of milk. It's right there. You can see it. And I had a mom say she didn't know if she had the guts to do that. I'm talking about little baby steps. I remember one time a 12-year-old and her mom came up to me at one of the airports and they wanted a picture. And then I found out she hadn't shopped. So I gave her a $5 bill and I said, go in that store across the hall and buy something. She bought a drink, brought the change back, gave it to me. First time she'd ever shopped by herself. Now, we didn't do a store at the opposite end of the airport. I did a store across the hall. We could both see it. You start out little baby steps. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, what's the ultimate goal of education? 10 years after high school, I was doing the dipping vat project shown in the movie. The HBO movie, Temple Grandin, shows how I think really accurately. The projects are accurate. Yeah, they did do some fiction stuff in there, but let me tell you, the projects are absolutely accurate. I did all the projects in that movie, and it shows how I think. My mother and Ann and the science teacher were shown really, really nicely in it. Let's go to the next slide. Now, how did I sell my work when I was weird? I'd show off my drawings. That's the drawing that I drew in 1978 for the Red River feed yard. In fact, the first feed yard that I worked in on DipVats was McElhaney's feed yard. It's now a Five Rivers feed yard in Welton, Arizona. Yep, he'd bring me up in Phoenix he had a Baron airplane, and he had a dog named Booger. I'm not kidding, that was his dog's name. And he was a blue heeler, dog hair all over the plane. Sam would tell air traffic control off at Sky Harbor Airport. I couldn't believe it. He'd just tell them off. This was 70s after all. But the way that I sold my work I sold my work. I just showed off my drawings. And so I recommended this kid today take the green and yellow grooming stand with the nice sign on it and get a steer in it and have a really nice picture to show off your welding. You know, and then he'd made some signs, the plasma cutter. Well, then you take pictures of those. And I made a portfolio of my work. That's how I sold Cargill. I'm going to show you the drawings I used to sell Cargill. I designed the front end of every Cargill plant in North America for beef. Let's go to the next slide. That's the drawing I sent to Cargill. Big 2-foot by 3-foot fold-out drawing. It was before there was internet. See, and as they come around the curve, and they got something very similar at One Beef, very similar design that I worked on laying out. And what you want to do is basically show them a 30-second wow. So they go, wow. Maybe you're weird, but you can do that. You sell the work. So he got sent that drawing. Okay, then I'll show you the next thing I sent him. I sent him this picture from the Red River DipVat job. And we'll go on to the next slide. That's an aerial view of the reconstruction of the DipVat projects that they made for the movie. They built a working replica that actually worked. And when I went to visit that, it was like going back to the feed yards in the 70s because I had anti-drowning mechanisms in it. I was down there the night before with a welder making sure that was on there right. That was really crazy. But these DipVats were real. Now, they didn't have chemicals in them. But other than that, they were real cattle going through it. I had to make sure nothing happened to the real ones. Now, I had a lot of problems in the beginning, and being a woman was a bigger barrier than autism ever was. And most of the trouble that I had, it was foremans. In the movie, there was a metal plate put in there that drowned the cattle because it made them slip. A foreman did that. Let's go to the next slide. And there's my brochure. And it's black and white because color printing was too expensive. Let's go to the next slide. And that's another picture I had in the brochure that went to Mr. Fielding at Cargill. 30-second wow. Let's go to the next slide. All right, let's talk about some things we can take home and help you. Lots of exercise. I found I had to do a burst of hard exercise every day, and I still do it, 100 sit-ups every day. I hate exercising. I absolutely hate it. But and when I came into the airport, I had plenty of time. I said, I'm going to just walk in through the parking garage, go through the culvert thing, and walk in through the parking garage, just to get the exercise. But that hard exercise, burst of hard exercise, that's important. Let's go to the next slide. All right, let's look at work experience. Talked a little bit about chores for little kids, volunteer jobs for 11-year-olds, like maybe a church volunteer job where somebody else is the boss, they got to do it every week. At 13, Mother found me a little sewing job in the summer, and she just did it with a seamstress that was in the neighborhood. There's all kinds of back doors into things. There's a scene in the HBO movie where I walk up to the editor of the Farmer Ranchman and I'd get his card. That scene's real because I knew if I wrote for that magazine, that would really, really help my career. And a lot of people aren't seeing these back doors. Half of all good jobs are back doors. At 15, I was cleaning horse stalls. I had a terrible time in high school with bullying and teasing, absolutely horrible. Elementary school, I managed to avoid bullying and teasing because Mrs. Deach explained to the other children that I had, it was my third grade teacher, that I had a disability that was not visible like a wheelchair. It's called peer-mediated intervention. And last night I heard about a little 7-year-old that they were bullying because he made some funny noises and he sometimes would flap. Well, this is where the teacher and maybe the mom need to explain to the other children why he does this. He can say he has a problem in his nervous system and he's doing it to calm down, or he does it when he gets too excited. And I think that's too bad. And that's going on right now in one of the schools. Talked to Mom last night. And the teacher said something stupid like, kids don't know what they're saying. Oh, come on, BS now. At 16 years old, I had the chance to visit my aunt's ranch. And this is what introduced me to the cattle industry. And I was scared to go. I was living back east. Mother said, you have a choice. You can go for a week or you can go all summer. A choice. Not going wasn't one of the choices. I got out there and I loved it. 16, I was roofing the horse barn. That's probably illegal, but man, it was fun. But then another little job I did is I had a little sign painting business. And this teaches a really important thing, is I had to make signs that my customers would want. This is really important. And the first sign I ever made for pay was for a hair salon. I sold it for $10, and I put the Breck lady on it. I didn't know about copyright law at that point. I put the Breck lady on that, and then when I was in college, I was doing some career-related internships. No, we need to be working on the working skills. This is where we're really falling down. And a lot of these kids, when they get out and they get in a job, they just blossom. You got to get them out doing things. And some of the most fun stuff I ever did is we were sitting around trying to figure out how to build stuff. That was some of the funnest stuff. Let's go to the next slide. Back doors into jobs. Okay, I went up and I got the editor's card. And that enabled me to go to big national meetings. There's another scene in there where the lady liked my Western shirt. That also happened. That got me into the Swift plant. These are these back doors into jobs. And a lot of people just aren't seeing them. Let's go to the next slide. Now in the 50s, this is typical stuff that all the kids did. When kids were 7 or 8, you had to put on your good clothes when the parents had a party and be little party hosts and hostesses. That taught social skills. I had to learn how to shake hands with people. Really important social skills. Selling candy for charity. Shopping by myself, and then money. When I was like 7 or 8 years old, I got 50 cents a week for allowance. I could buy 5 Superman comics, but if I wanted a 69-cent airplane, I had to save for 2 weeks. I was learning that at age 7 and 8. These are not difficult things to do. You know, then the way I understand money, being a visual thinker, is I'll never forget when I saw a hockey table in the toy store window. And I had a hockey table. It was one of my favorite games. It was $21. So I calculated that out. Arithmetic, I could do just fine. It was almost a year's worth of allowance. So even now, a $20 bill is a hockey table. It's probably a $250 hockey table now. But this was in the 50s. Let's go to the next slide. Well, friends through shared interest. And horseback riding was a really big interest, building things. That's why we got to get kids involved in a lot of different things where they can get friends through shared interests. Let's go to the next slide. And also on work skills, I took this ugly shed when I was a teenager and I fixed it all up and I made it really nice. But I couldn't decorate it with flying saucers. I had to decorate it in a way that the other people would like it. That's a really important skill. Now, I talked to a girl today in special ed. She was making beautiful Batman cartoons. And I said, why don't you invent your own character? Okay, this is an example of broadening an interest. And there was really good Batman drawings. She was talented. I see a lot of stuff that kids draw, a lot of it's not that good, but this kid had some talent. She really had some talent. But let's broaden it. You see, when I was at 8 years old, I would just draw the same horse head over and over again. And Mother would say to me, let's draw the whole horse. Let's draw the stable. Let's draw where you ride it to. See how she's broadening that. You're taking that fixated interest and you're broadening. Let's go to the next slide. And that's me up there painting a stupid sign for the carnival. and I was in my 20s. But you see, this all taught the kind of entrepreneur, being an entrepreneur. How did I get this job? I showed some pictures of my sign painting to an old sign painter, and he put me to work at the Arizona State Fair. Let's go to the next slide. And that's my sign painting truck. Let's discuss driving. If I hadn't learned to drive, there would have been no cattle industry stuff. It's that simple. I spent my aunt's ranch, the mailbox was 3 miles away on a dirt road. So I had 3 miles up, 3 miles back, 6 days a week to learn how to drive. You need to have a much longer period of time in a very safe place before you start traffic. And then I heard about a kid here that drove into a canal. Well, let's start out away from the canals. Come on, let's make sure we're in a place where something like that is not going to happen. Big deserted parking lots on Sunday. Then there are places where you can drive where you're not going to go into a canal. Because what you got to do is you got to get the driving into motor memory, how you operate the car in motor memory before you do traffic. That solves the multitasking problem. It's going to take longer. And I know there's simulators and stuff now you can use, but just a lot more practice in a really safe place. Let's go to the next slide. All right, slow transition from school to work. Jobs on a schedule outside the home at 11 or 12. Learning shopping. I'm not just appalled at how these kids aren't learning any skills. Doing well in school, but they haven't ever done any work experience. Let's have 2 real jobs before they graduate from high school. I think it might be a really good idea. Let's go to the next slide. And another important mentor for me, and I had some great mentors, was Jim the contractor, a Marine Corps captain. You know, he's out of the Marines, starting a tiny construction company, and he seeked me out. And here we are on one of the dip vat projects under construction. Now, I had no idea how to do the concrete reinforcement. When Sam McElhaney asked me to design a dip vat, I said, give me 3 weeks. Boy, I got on the phone and I got the engineering drawings for the steel reinforcement. Professionally done engineering drawings. Let's go to the next slide. Finding mentors. My mother, she had to teach me how to read at age 8. I couldn't read. Whole word didn't work for me. She taught me with phonics. Real simple, out loud, sounding out words with a book that's worth reading. It wasn't that hard. Great elementary school teachers, my science teacher, and Jim the contractor. These were important mentors. Let's go to the next slide. Let's talk about sensory issues. They are real. They also are highly variable. So what can we do to help the kid that can't stand the noise of the shop tools? Well, okay, you could wear a headset. The other thing you can do is go down there when nobody's around and you turn the stuff on and off, like the electric drill, for example, where they turn it on and off, where they control the sound. Or the kid's scared of the vacuum cleaner. They should be turning it on and off. When I was 5, I was terrified of Mr. Russell's vacuum cleaner. I had this huge bag and I was sure it was going to suck me up. Well, they should have let me turn it on and off, where you have control. Now there's certain stuff, like using certain tools are really noisy, well then you can just wear the ear protectors. But the problem is, if you wear a headphone all the time, the sound sensitivity will worsen. So in much more regular sort of situations, you want to have it with you, but try not to wear it. Okay, these horrible bathrooms with everything going off all at once, hand dryers and flushers, yeah, you can put it on for that, but then take it off. But have it with you so you have control. That can help a lot on the sound sensitivity. And then you got to find clothes that don't itch. I find Walmart, some of the Walmart pants are really nice. They've been some of the better stuff. They actually don't rip up in 5 seconds. And then autism environmental enrichment, that's actually a evidence-based method for desensitization, where you stimulate 2 senses at the same time, like maybe touch and smell. Let's go to the next slide. Now, another kind of problem is the visual processing problems. I don't have these problems. These are the kids that are terrified of escalators, even though their eye exam may be normal. They're the ones that might be seeing LED lights flickering, and some LED lights flicker and some don't. And you know how you figure out which LED lights are the bad ones? Take pictures of them in slow motion video and wave like this. Then play it back in slow motion. So you want to make sure it's actually going in slow motion, and then you can see the flicker. And some kids will complain the print jiggles on the page. I'm going to estimate that maybe 20% of the population has got this problem. It's not everybody. I don't have the problem, but I know other people that do. And your eye exam, your regular eye exam, and you should definitely do that, be more or less normal. Let's go to the next slide. And some individuals on the spectrum will complain about image breakup, similar to migraine headaches. Let's go to the next slide. Can you imagine if that's what your seeing was like? These are some pictures I found online that were the best pictures to describe what some individuals on the autism spectrum say they're seeing. So you might have a nonverbal student and they want to smell everything, touch everything. Those senses still work. And seeing's scrambled. Let's go to the next slide. That just shows how maybe print might jiggle on the page. This explains only some dyslexia. Not all dyslexia. It's just a subgroup that has this problem. Okay, let's look at some things we could do to help it. The next slide shows them. I like really simple things that we can do, like find some LED lights that don't flicker. Okay, let's say the classroom's got expensive ceiling LED lights that flicker. You might try changing the dimmer switch. If that doesn't work, then it might get expensive. And so what you do if you don't have windows is you've got to put another lamp on the desk that doesn't flicker. And incandescents are getting really hard to find now. Then you got to find a really powerful LED that doesn't flicker. And you put that on the desk. And the other thing you can try for some of these kids is printing the homework on light tan paper, light blue paper, pastel colored papers. Now you might say, well, that's not evidence-based. I'm talking about colored paper here. It's safe, it's cheap, and you'll know in 15 minutes whether it works. Yeah, just try it, you got nothing to lose. I've actually seen it work. But this only works for a subgroup, not for everybody. Let's go to the next slide. Now, people with very severe sensory problems may need to have sensory breaks. They may need to have breaks where they can calm down. All right, I get parents to say, well, what accommodations do you have? Okay, does this college have accommodations? All right, let's look at the specific combination you might need. Extra time on tests, get away from lights that flicker. Let's talk about something that's specific. A big mistake that a lot of students make when they go away to college is when they get in trouble with a class, they don't ask for help soon enough. When I failed my first math quiz, I got tutoring. And thank goodness, the math class in college wasn't algebra. It was mostly statistics. And with tutoring, and a pile of tutoring, I managed to get through it. And you notice I don't put that much emphasis on eye contact. Okay, to really work on eye contact, that can overload the processor, and then I have trouble hearing. I still sometimes have problems with background noise. Let's go to the next slide. Environmental treatment is an effective treatment for autism. That's an actual title of a paper, of an evidence-based method, simple method, where you stimulate two senses at the same time, and you keep changing them to help on desensitizing some of the sensory oversensitivity, using simple stuff, like cold water glasses and aromatherapy. It's simple stuff, it's not expensive stuff. Then you do it 2 15-minute sessions, and it's not dangerous in any way, and it might just help. Let's go to the next slide. All right, if you're working with older children and adults who remain nonverbal, I consider these books must-reads, and you will have to order them online. Now, Tito Mukhopadhyay, he describes sensory scrambling. And when I first met him, he runs into this library where we were at, and he's running all around. And his mom says, let Tito tell you about autism. I go, nope. He's going to tell me about something where he couldn't possibly be cued. So I found this old Scientific American in the library, and it had a picture of an astronaut in a spacesuit riding a horse in the desert. And I showed that picture to Tito, and I said, tell me about this picture. And he types really fast, Apollo 11 on a horse. And then he gets up and runs around. There's no way that's cued. There's Carly's voice, and then the Japanese boy, The Reason I Jump. And I like the sequel better, has better insight. Fall down 7 times, get up 8. These are all available online. and they really give you insight. And we need to be helping these kids to, type independently. Some of them can do it, some of them cannot do it. But you have to have the print next to the keyboard. Laptops are horrible. And if you use a desktop, put the keyboard on a box so the print is right next to the keyboard. Because the thing they can't do is attention shift. They can't do that. Well, they have to have the tablet will work, and then there's a plastic grating you put on a tablet that helps guide the fingers. That's something that's simple. I like simple stuff that people can do. But you're working with older nonverbal individuals, these books are must-reads as far as I'm concerned. Let's go to the next slide. Attention shifting slowness. I have this problem. There's a kind of conversation that people do, a kind of fast chit-chat conversation. I can't follow it. I don't have the processor speed to follow that. And people just have so much fun talking about, joking and stuff. It goes too fast. Attention shifting slowness. Let's go to the next slide. I'll show you a slide that really illustrates this. This is an old study done with the very first eye tracking software. Look at how many times the normal person looks back and forth watching a movie compared to the autistic. And the autistic's trying to read lips. Now, if you read this old Ami Klin paper, it only gives you a social reason for this. I look at this and I go, this is the best illustration of attention shifting slowness I've ever seen. This is an ancient old paper. Let's go to the next slide. Teaching little kids, slow down when you talk. When the grown-ups talked fast, it went to gibberish. Always encourage a kid to use their words. And give them time to respond. They're like a phone with 1 bar of service. It takes time to download the web page. You've got to give them time to respond. Now, another 50s method is what I call teachable moments. So let's say the kid stirs his drink with his finger. Instead of screaming, no, say, use the spoon. Give the instruction instead of screaming no. That was done all the time in the 50s. And teach turn taking. They've got to learn how to wait and take turns at all kinds of games. I had a lot of emphasis on that. Let's go to the next slide. Well, turns out the working memory department's trashed. Go to the next slide. Fear. A lot of individuals have chronic anxiety. When puberty hit, that's when the anxiety started. I was 14 when I went into puberty. A lot of kids are going in much earlier. And I found out that my fear center was 3 times larger than normal. My nervous system was in a constant state of fear for absolutely no reason. No, it was all biological. And as I went through my 20s, it worsened and worsened and worsened and worsened. Then I had horrible colitis attacks that were tearing me apart. I don't even know if I'd be alive today if I hadn't discovered the medication that I'm on. Let's go to the next slide. Well, I was afraid of airplanes because in my senior year I was in a very scary emergency landing, and I was also afraid of public speaking. Well, before I went on the medication, I managed to get over the fear of airplanes. That one was the worst one. I hated that airplane. It's called a Fokker. You better say that very carefully. That's the name of that airplane. But air traffic controllers thought it was really funny to call it something else. We'll leave it at that. But when that thing put the gear down, I was sure the belly of the plane was falling out. It was just ridiculous. Let's go to the next slide. So how did I get over the fear of flying? I got to go in the cockpit of an old Connie that hauled dairy cattle to Puerto Rico. You take the thing you're afraid of and you make it interesting. And when you make it interesting, then it's less scary. Let's go on to the next slide. All right. As I got into my early 30s, my health was falling apart from my anxiety. And that's when I discovered a low dose of antidepressant medication. And this has been described for the last 25 years in my book, Thinking in Pictures. And even though that's old, it's not in the new book, Visual Thinking, that's more about the skill loss and the educational system. But a low dose of an antidepressant medication made the colitis go away. And I have been on that drug for 40 years. And I've seen other people take a little dose of Prozac and it makes a big difference. Also seen them go off of it with some disastrous results. But if you give too high a dose of an antidepressant, you'll get agitation and insomnia. And that's all described in also the Way I See It book's got medication information. Now, way too many drugs are given out to little kids. Way too many. It's disgusting. But sometimes just a little bit of just the right thing. That's why I have to drink water, because of the medication. Let's go to the next slide. And then I used my squeezing machines. I got the idea from a cattle squeeze chute. You can see that's my skilled trade stuff. I built that all by my little self-ski. So that's skilled trade stuff. And deep pressure can be calming. Doesn't work on everybody, but it works on some people. Let's go to the next slide. Well, and there's a simpler way to do it. Things like, beanbag chairs, stuff like that. Let's go to the next slide. And there is papers out now that show that sensory integration treatment is an evidence-based therapy. I just downloaded that paper again the other day. Somebody who wanted it. You got to show kids interesting things to get them interested in interesting things. And in the HBO movie, it shows how I got interested in this optical illusion room, because I saw it in a Bell Labs movie, and they actually showed a clip of the movie I was shown in science class. And my science teacher, well, I want you to figure out how to build this. They weren't going to just tell me. Let's go to the next slide. That's Penrose tiling. That's what Stephen Hawking used for his math. Pure pattern thinking. He said, concentrate on those things your disability doesn't prevent you from doing well. And he could do math super well in his head. Let's go to the next slide. When we get science and nature magazines, and you look at some of the things the mathematicians are doing, they're doing things with beautiful geometric patterns. And these are inside your body. They're inside materials they're making in a lab. They're inside all kinds of stuff. Let's go to the next slide. Fractals. This stuff's free. You can find it online. Let's go to the next slide. Plants have mathematics in them. Isn't that cool? Go to the next slide. I'll leave up those educational materials there. And what I want to do before we sign books is I want to just do a few questions. So if anybody has a question, I'm going to answer it right now. And I'm going to pick somebody if nobody has any questions. No questions? Okay. You're going to have to come up close where I can hear you. What are robots made out of? Well, they're made out of all kinds of materials that any mechanical thing can be made out of, and they're controlled by a computer. And there's a really cute movie I saw on a plane. It's called Spare Parts. And it's about some kids where a science teacher had them, high school kids, enter a robotics contest against MIT, and they beat MIT with materials they bought from a Home Depot type store. Spare Parts. And I actually checked it out to see how accurate it was. They embellished some stuff, but the science teacher's true. They actually did beat MIT. They did some very clever things, and they had to use cheap materials. What it shows is what a good science teacher can do for some kids. Okay, right here. How to what? Well, I'm smart in certain things. I'm not very smart in algebra. You see, I think we really have to, I was looking at some algebra they were doing in one of the schools today. I'm going, I don't know, this is over my head. You see, there's nothing to visualize. And I think part of the problem is some educators have a hard time understanding that visual thinking exists. Things are getting more and more verbal. We got a power grid that's falling apart here. You're going to need people like me to put that back together again. And we've got lots of books to sell, and if we run out, I'll sign little pieces of paper that they got that you can stick in the book. But I really want you to look at my visual thinking book, my new book, because this is a serious skill loss issue. And there's a big connection here between what's going on in schools. Well, it wouldn't be, if I was 18 today, but I had my knowledge, heading for that Amazon warehouse. I got big dreams. I'm going to do them because I'd have to totally go in the back door, or I'm going to go to the new chip factory they're building in Ohio or Phoenix. There's things for me to do there, but I won't be able to go in the front door. Okay, right here. Jen, I can't. Okay, the question, if I heard it right, is what helped me make me successful. It's one step at a time. There were a lot of mentors along the way that helped me. There was no single big thing. And I'm always learning. Always learning. And you see, the thing is, since I'm a bottom-up thinker, my thinking became better when I got out and I started getting exposed to more things. We got to get these kids out doing things and give them some choices. Let's say they're afraid to go shopping. All right, it's Target or Walmart. Give them a choice. You see, and that's important. Giving some limited choice. Because I've worked with people on the autism spectrum, whole family of people who's dyslexic that built feed mills in Texas. They're all retired now. No, we need all the different kinds of minds. Okay, how about right here? She's still nonverbal. Well, first of all, if a 4-year-old's nonverbal, you've got to give her a way to communicate. Because there's nothing more frustrating than not being able to communicate. So when the nonverbal throws a fit, it might be sensory overload in the middle of a busy Walmart, or it's more likely to be frustration because they can't communicate. You've got to give her some way to communicate. It can be as simple as a picture board. But does she have any language at all? She does have a few words. And now is she making any progress? And if she's making steady progress, but she's also gotten to the point now you've got to give her some way to communicate, because it's horribly frustrating when you can't communicate. You know, sometimes picture exchange works. There's kind of like 3 ways speech can be messed up. I had trouble getting my speech out. But if the parents or the teachers talked too fast, it went to blah, 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 blah. And then you got the echolalic kid that will yak out a TV script, but they got no idea what it means after they've played it over and over again. Those kids have to learn that the words have meaning. So you might take some lines out of that movie script and try to work them into real conversation. Start teaching them names of favorite things. But does she have any kind of alternative way to communicate? Okay, so she has a way to communicate. Okay, that's good. All right, but you have to look at when they throw a fit, why is she throwing a fit? Let's look at the things that causes it. Frustrated because she can't communicate. Sometimes it's sensory overload. And then some kids learn to manipulate throwing fits. But you have to be really careful and make sure it's not sensory overload and it's not frustration because they can't communicate, which is horribly, horribly frustrating. Okay? Okay, the question concerned assessments. Well, there's nothing practical you can use, but around 7 or 8 years old, my kind of mind loves to build things and is good at art. But I'm seeing kids that never get a chance to even try using tools. How would you know they can build things if they don't get access to Legos and things? Then I see other kids that are doing all these Legos and nobody's thought to graduate them to tools. And then the math kids will take off in math. But the thing about the math kids is they just look at the formula and they give you the answer. Let them do it their way. They don't think sequentially. How old is he? He's 14, okay. Well, is he fixing computer hardware, or what's he doing? Well, that's going to be more the visual thinker. I'd rather work on the hardware. That I understand. And, you know, and things like mechanics and art tend to go together. And then music and math tend to go together. It isn't always like that. And if he's 14, can he do his basic skills? Bathing, dressing, all of that stuff. Okay, good. He's also old enough to start learning a few little job skills. Because the thing is, a lot of the nonverbals are underestimated. I went to school and called Celebrate the Children in New Jersey 2 weeks ago. They were learning how to use real cameras, and they were not breaking them. They were nonverbal. And I only found one punched door in the whole place. You know, most of them were nonverbal, older. You see, they also know the difference between making them do fake, stupid work and real work. Don't make them do stupid, fake things. They know the difference. You know, they see a lot of some of these nonverbals. They got a good brain inside there that just can't express itself. Okay. Everyone can hear me. We have to look at, you know, on accommodations, what kind of help you actually needed. Okay, so you had trouble with so my problems in college were math. Reading and writing I was doing just fine. Well, I think let's just go up to the books, and I think we're going to call it a night, and I'll see everybody up at the book table, and thank you all for coming, and I'll talk to you. Okay.
I got it. Dustin, we'll have somebody take you up right now.